Ukraine, a country in Eastern Europe, has become a focal point of global tension. Its complex history and strategic location have made it a bridge and a battleground between Russia and the West. For centuries, Ukraine's fertile lands and rich resources have attracted powerful empires. The current conflict between Ukraine and Russia is deeply rooted in this history. The collapse of the Soviet Empire in 1991 gave birth to an independent Ukraine. This newly independent nation inherited a complex legacy of ties to both Russia and Europe. These ties, cultural, economic, and political, would shape Ukraine's destiny. Competing visions for Ukraine's future emerged. Russia sought to maintain its influence over its neighbor. The West saw an opportunity to expand its sphere of influence. Ukraine found itself caught in the middle of this geopolitical tug-of-war. The year 1991 marked a turning point for Ukraine. After decades under Soviet rule, Ukraine declared its independence. This historic moment followed a referendum in which the majority of Ukrainians voted to leave the Soviet Union. However, the transition to independence was not without its challenges. Ukraine inherited a complex economic and political system from the Soviet era. Corruption was rampant, and the economy struggled to adapt to a market-based system. Russia saw Ukraine as a vital part of its sphere of influence. Despite these challenges, Ukraine embarked on a path of democratic reforms and economic liberalization. It sought to integrate itself into the European community, much to Russia's dismay. In 2004, Ukraine held a presidential election marred by allegations of widespread fraud and irregularities. The disputed 2004 election sparked mass protests in Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians took to the streets of Kyiv and other cities. They demanded a recount and free and fair elections. These protests, known as the Orange Revolution, forced the government to annul the election results. A new election was held, and the pro-Western candidate Viktor Yushchenko emerged victorious. The Orange Revolution demonstrated the Ukrainian people's desire for democracy and their rejection of Russian interference. However, it also deepened the divide between pro-Russian and pro-Western Ukrainians. Russia viewed the Orange Revolution as a Western-backed coup. The events of 2014 would further escalate tensions between Russia and Ukraine. In November 2013, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign an association agreement with the European Union, sparking a new wave of protests. The Euromaidan protests and the subsequent violence in Kiev had a profound impact on Ukraine. President Yanukovych fled to Russia, and a new government led by pro-Western politicians came to power. Russia condemned the change of government in Kiev as a coup d'état. It accused the West of orchestrating the protests and installing a puppet regime in Ukraine. In response, Russia took a series of actions with far-reaching consequences. Russian troops seized control of the Crimean Peninsula, a Ukrainian territory with a majority Russian population. A hastily organized referendum showed overwhelming support for Crimea's annexation to Russia. The international community condemned Russia's actions and imposed sanctions on Moscow. The annexation of Crimea marked the first time since World War II that a European country had annexed the territory of another by force. The annexation also had a significant impact on the security situation in Europe. The conflict in Ukraine is not just a regional dispute, it is a clash of geopolitical interests between Russia and the West, particularly NATO. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is a military alliance formed in 1949 to counter the Soviet Union's influence in Europe. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO expanded eastward, admitting several former Soviet republics and Warsaw Pact members. This expansion has been a source of tension between Russia and the West. Russia views NATO's eastward expansion as a threat to its security. It argues that NATO's presence in Eastern Europe undermines Russia's strategic depth. The West argues that NATO's expansion is purely defensive. Ukraine's desire to join NATO has been a particularly sensitive issue. Russia has repeatedly warned Ukraine against joining NATO, threatening serious consequences. The annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass marked a significant escalation in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The war in Donbass became a protracted conflict with no end in sight. Ceasefire agreements were often violated. The conflict in Donbass had a devastating impact on the region. Thousands of people were killed and millions were displaced from their homes. The economy of the Donbass, once a major industrial center of Ukraine, was shattered. The conflict also had a profound impact on Ukrainian society. It deepened the divide between pro-Russian and pro-Western Ukrainians. In the years following the annexation of Crimea, Russia continued to build up its military presence along its border with Ukraine. By 2021, tensions between Russia and Ukraine had reached a boiling point, with Russia amassing over 100,000 troops along its border.